Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 232 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. You might have noticed there was no intro music this week. A couple of reasons for that. One is that we've been on vacation, having a great time with our family and grandchildren. Oh my gosh, so cool to spend time with your family. Love doing that. Hope you got that opportunity to spend time with family and friends and loved ones over the holidays. So we were late getting to the recording studio. The second reason is that my assistant, my longtime assistant, is not feeling well. She's got a really bad case of the flu. And while I've got backups for almost everything, I don't have a backup for the way she puts together the podcast files. So we're just going to a cold open. Here we are, and I'm glad to be with you. And I hope June gets well soon because I really need her back. In any event, it's great to be here with you. Hope that your 2019 is off to a good start, that your bar studies have begun, and that you're excited about what's coming in the year ahead. We're excited to be with you. If this is your first time on the podcast, welcome. We're glad to have you here. We do offer this podcast in a couple of different formats. If you prefer the video, you can check that out by going to our website, which is celebrationbarreview.com / followed by the episode number. This is episode 232. So just put that in / 232 and you'll see the video along with the show notes and all the information that you need. If you prefer to listen to the podcast, you can do that on Apple iTunes, on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and a lot of other places where podcasts are syndicated. And if you're interested in going back in our archives, we've been doing these podcasts now for about 4 years. You can check it out on our website. There is a link at the top of the page for podcasts. Just go back and you'll see all the show notes and all of the subjects. You can do a topic search, and there's lots of great information there. So encourage you to do all of that. And thank you to all of you who share this podcast with your friends and colleagues, classmates. The podcast has just grown and grown and grown over the years. And it kind of surprises and amazes me when I look at the statistics sometimes. But we're very appreciative of that. We thank you for sharing the information and for the great feedback that you give me about things that you like. Now, last week's episode was a bit different. I did a subject lecture that I called Situational Awareness, and I had a lot of fun with it. It kind of reminded me of the shark in Jaws, dum 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 dum, and the hero or heroine that doesn't turn around until too late. Kind of seems like a bar taker sometimes. And I encourage you to check out episode 231. But I wanted to stay a little bit in that theme of just talking about some of the strategy and techniques that I think make a difference when it comes to studying for the bar exam. And so in today's episode, we're going to be talking about this amazing search engine that exists in your brain. And I'm going to explain how this search engine works when it comes to writing essays and compare it to the search engine on Google or Amazon.com. So I hope you'll stick around. I think it's a message that you'll enjoy, and it'll be very helpful to you in terms of understanding how you can get the maximum benefit out of writing your essays for the bar exam. Before we turn to that specific message, though, I do want to let all of you know that we have a very special free training coming up on Thursday night, January 10th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. This training is titled Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. And during this training, I'm going to be explaining the 4 steps that successful bar takers follow in order to pass their exam. This is built on 30 years of working with students all across the country in all kinds of different situations. You'll be hearing from those students directly through videos that they've recorded for us, and we'll be showing you step by step what you need to do in order to be successful. So if you're taking the bar exam in 2019 or beyond, I encourage you to join us for this free training. It's a 90-minute training program. I think you're going to find it incredibly helpful. You do need to register in advance. It's very easy to do that. In the show notes for the audio or the video version of today's podcast, you can find the link. Just click there and sign up. Very easy. Or you can go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com /webinar and sign up there. Now, we recognize that Thursday at 7 p.m. may not be convenient for everyone, so we also offer an on-demand version. You'll see that button. You can select that instead and get immediate access to the same material. I will say, however, that on Thursday the 10th, I'll be doing a live Q&A at the end of the presentation. It's always a great opportunity to answer questions that people have, and I definitely encourage you to attend the live training. It's where the magic happens, in my view, and it's a great opportunity to get your questions answered. So I hope you'll join us Thursday the 10th, 7 p.m. Eastern. That would be 4 o'clock Pacific time. So check that out. You can sign up on the show notes or at celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. Well, I want to go ahead and jump into today's message. As I said, we're going to talk about this amazing search engine that exists in your brain. I'm going to try and make it relevant to something that we all do every day, which is to search on Google or maybe to go on Amazon.com. Or maybe I'm just thinking about that because the holiday season has passed and I seem to have spent a great deal of my time and money on Amazon. But I want to make that analogy because I think it's a great one to help us understand the writing process. So let's jump into that message today. Writing good bar exam essays is one of the most difficult things for most people to do. And I think that one of the reasons for that problem is that we're so inculcated and brainwashed about this idea of issue spotting and IRAC writing that we learned in law school that we really lose sight of the skill that's being tested for essays on the bar exam itself. See, the bar exam, as I've said elsewhere, is not an exam that comes at the end of law school. It's not the ultimate law school test. It's actually the first test of your practice life, and it tests a different set of skills. And one of those skills when it comes to essay writing is how to think and write like a lawyer. Now, over the years, I've developed a writing style that we've used for literally thousands of people very successfully, and I want to give you 3 broad steps in that process that you can apply. But I also was trying to think, how do I explain that in a way that would make sense to you? And it struck me that it's actually very similar to something we all do every day, which is to put a search on Google or maybe to go to Amazon.com to buy something. So I'm going to give you each step and then give you the analogy to what we do online every day, and I hope it'll make sense to you. I think it will. So here's our first step. The first thing to do when you're faced with an essay question is don't try to spot the issues, and instead what you should do is define the conflicts. In other words, what's the dispute between the parties? What are the points of conflict or disagreement between party A and party B and C and so on? Now, what most bar takers do is that they begin with issue spotting, which is this broad level of generality that is very difficult to winnow through and work through. And they get hung up and they end up picking a lot of things, most of which are not relevant. The bar examiners aren't interested in issue spotting for a very simple reason. It's inefficient. If you issue spot at $300 an hour for your client isn't going to be happy. If you issue spot in front of a judge or a jury, they're not going to be happy. If you issue spot for the partner in your law firm who's paying you a salary, they're not going to be happy. What we're looking for is get to the root of the problem and then be able to use the law effectively. And that's what the examiners are testing ultimately in the essay part of the exam. But when I talk about how do you get from this point of not trying to spot issues and instead define conflicts, I know that that's difficult for a lot of people because we're so ingrained with this idea from law school and from our previous writing. Maybe you've even learned it in your bar review. I mean, the big box bar reviews teach this almost exclusively. Well, here's where the analogy comes in. Let's assume that you need some information and you, like most people, go to your computer or your laptop, your tablet, your phone, and you go to that Google search bar, right? You know what it is. Now, the first thing you have to do is identify what information you need before you start typing into Google. Now, this is a fascinating process. I am able to see from our website the kinds of searches that people make for bar reviews. And I got to tell you, it's pretty bizarre. Some people ask for bars in, New York or Texas or Florida. Some people ask for different kinds of bars, as you can imagine. Some people ask for reviews of bars, all of which is not what we're looking for at all. There are lots of things that you could ask about when it comes to the bar exam, but the most effective inquiries are the ones that are what we call long tail keywords. And what we mean by that is that someone types out a very specific inquiry of what they're looking for. They say, what's the best bar review for the state of California? Now, that's pretty specific. When that search goes in, you get a much better result than when you just say bar exam California. Well, here's where the analogy comes in. When someone's issue spotting in an essay, they're doing the equivalent of saying bar exam. Well, what bar exam? Where? How? What do you need to know about it? Where it is? When it happens? What does it cost? What do you have to do? What do you need? There's lots of questions that would be unanswered by that broad inquiry. So what you want to do is write a narrow kind of argument. You want to be more specific in making the original inquiry. And this is important. When you're writing an essay, you need to make a specific inquiry. What is it that party A is upset about? Is it the acceptance of a contract or the offer of a contract or maybe a breach of the contract? Is it all of those things? Or maybe it's one part of the contract, or maybe it's the remedy that's being offered in terms of that contract. The more specifically you can define the conflict, the easier it is to identify it. In the same way, when you do a Google search and you notice that when you write a very short, broad search, you get a lot of results, most of which are not valid. And that's also kind of weird. But when you write a more specific search, you get a better targeted result. And the same is true when it comes to writing your essay. So the first thing I think you want to do after you've read a fact pattern is to identify what the conflicts or the disputes are. And you do that by being very specific. What is it that these parties are in disagreement about? And the more specifically you can identify that, the easier it'll be to work with it. If you take the broad concept of contracts, wow, that's a lot of area to cover, isn't it? But if you break it down to the smaller parts of contracts and then smaller subparts beyond that, it gets much easier to work with. So I think that step number one for most people is to avoid the broad generalities and get into as specific a detailed analysis as they can. Now, in our course, we show you how to do that specifically through the use of some techniques of creating disputes and conflict pairs. But the general concept is very simple. Don't be broad and abstract. Be detailed and specific. And if you do that, you're going to be at the conflict or the disagreement or the dispute level. Now, step number two is in writing an essay. After you've defined what the disputes are in the problem, you want to be able to write into your essay the actual arguments that are being made on both sides of the dispute. Remember, if it's not in dispute, it's not worth writing about. It's not a case or a controversy. And so by definition, every dispute that you see in a fact pattern probably has some value to the examiners. Your task as an applicant is to identify the arguments that party A would make in their behalf and the arguments that party B would make on their behalf. And a lot of times what I find is that bar applicants skip this step altogether. They issue spot, they forget about making arguments, and then they try to either apply a rule or just recite a rule. Without the context of an argument, none of that really matters very much, and it doesn't demonstrate to the examiner, to the reader, that you understand how the law is actually being used. It's the ability to meld the law with the argument. But if you never articulate the argument, you're in trouble. Now, there's an analogy in our Google search term as well. Let's say that we've identified a long stretch of material. We say, I want to know about bar exams in California. Well, now the next step in that search is to begin to narrow the parameters. I want to know about bar exams in California that are online courses for 2019. Or I want to know the best bar review course when it comes to essay writing for California based on the last few years. Or I want to know the bar exam that's got the highest success rate in California for the last 30 years. By the way, that's us. I want to know more specifics. I want to narrow the parameters. And in narrowing the parameters, what you're doing in a search is that you're beginning to take that broad search result and begin to make it a little more specific. What is it you want to know? What are your costs? What are your prices? What kind of course offerings do you have? What's the format? All of those are ways to narrow the parameters of the search that you get from Google. You get a lot of information. If that's hard to imagine, use the example of Amazon.com. You go to Amazon and you say, I need a shirt. And Amazon says, well, what kind of a shirt? A men's shirt, a women's shirt? What color? Do you want long sleeves or short sleeves? Do you want button up or crew? And the list goes on and on and on. You're identifying and narrowing the parameters of what you're looking for. The narrowing of parameters is the second step in articulating arguments. It's the way that we really say to the reader, here's how we're taking this broad problem of the conflict and we're beginning to define it. What's important to us here? What's important to the first party and the second party? And we want to do that progressively throughout the answer. Now, again, there's a way to organize an answer that makes all this come together better, and it's part of what we teach our students. But the concept is very straightforward. Once you've done step one and defined the conflict, the second step is think of the argument, make the argument. Now, sometimes people will say to me, well, I can't imagine what the arguments are. And that's exactly what goes on. You imagine the arguments. Imagine that you were in a courtroom. What would Party A's lawyer be saying? What would Party B's attorney say in response? And if that's too hard for you, if you don't like to see the world in litigious terms, and what are you doing as a lawyer, then you could at least think of it as mediation. What's our position for Party 1 and position for Party 2? Or we're coming together in a settlement conference. What's the position of one party and the other? Again, remembering that there's always a conflict and multiple conflicts in an essay problem, being able to articulate the arguments is critically important. And when you skip that step, you're really leaving the reader out of a vital step in understanding how you're going to use the law. And without that, I think you're making a big mistake. Now notice that when it comes to IRAC, which is Issue, Rule, Application, Conclusion, there's no argument in there. We never even talk about that. It never comes up. And for some people, this is problematic because they think to themselves that using arguments would mean talking about the facts, and somehow using the facts would be less intellectual. That's not true at all. Arguments are built on facts, but they're also melded with the law, as we'll see in a moment. And so you need to use both of them, but you construct the argument from the facts that exist and that are given to you in the fact pattern. That's why it's there. It's not a law pattern, it's a fact pattern. Go ahead and use it that way. I think it's the same idea as going to that search bar and saying, well, I've got a whole bunch of search results, but now I need to narrow that down. There's 10,000 results here. I want to look at just the first 2 pages, and I want to look for specific information. So I might redefine my search. I might narrow it down. I might put some limiting terms or some additional terms in that would help me find the particular information or the particular item if I'm on Amazon that I'm looking for. So that's our second step. So far it's pretty simple. Define the conflicts as step 1, articulate the arguments as step 2. Then we come to step 3, which is an amazing step. You now want to ask yourself in writing the essay, having made the argument, what would the law have to be or say in order to support this argument? Let me say that again. What would the law have to be or say in order to support this argument? Now, why is that so critical? Well, you see, if you just define the conflict and you make the argument, but you never articulate the law, the rule, then the examiners are left hanging. I don't know how you got there. I'm not sure what that meant to you. I don't know why that was important. Is it something you just pulled out of thin air? It's the ability to articulate the law that shows that you really understand the law, that you're ready to be a member of the profession. And so it's important that you do that. But here's where people get hung up. If you've been doing issue, rule, application, conclusion, the rule piece that you've been learning has been abstract, hasn't it? It's been just, here's a memorized rule. You've created flashcards, or you've done mnemonics, or you've spent hours and hours cramming and trying to memorize. The reality, however, as you've undoubtedly discovered, is that you can't memorize as much material as is put in front of you. So inevitably, you end up feeling out of sync or unable to do everything that's required. It doesn't have to be that way, however. It's not necessary to memorize the law. You can paraphrase the law by doing the equivalent of what we would say of sorting results. And here's what I mean. Let's go back to our example of a Google search again. Now remember, we identified our need, we wrote a long query, and then we narrowed the parameters. We got more detail. Now in our search process, what we want to do is sort the results. What's most relevant to the particular question that we're trying to ask? If I want to know cost of a bar review company, then that's going to be the most relevant factor for me as I search the results. If I want to know location of the course or format of the course, that becomes most significant, and I sort my results based on those parameters and those ideas. Sorting results helps us take this narrower group that we had of the searches and put them in order. What's most important, next important, and so on. But we had to know what we were looking for in the first place, didn't we? It wouldn't do any good to do a request based on location of the bar exam or the bar review if, in fact, we wanted an online course. And so you've got to be aware of what it is that you're starting with in the original need. In our case, with the essay, what is it that we wanted to solve? We wanted to solve for a conflict. How do we do that? Well, we made an argument, and now what we need is the law that supports that argument. We need to sort our results using this amazing search engine in our brain. Now, when you do that search of results online, you are letting the internet, Google or Amazon or whomever, sort for you. And sometimes people say, well, when I'm doing an essay, I just don't know how I'm going to remember all of it. And I say to them, if you're on Amazon and you're searching for a shirt, do you actually go physically inspect the warehouse at Amazon before you order the shirt? Well, the answer is obviously no, you don't. You just believe that Amazon will produce the right shirt for you if you give it the right parameters, the right inputs, the right information and request. Why? Because it's got this amazing algorithm that can figure out, based on what you said you wanted, here's what meets that need most specifically. But here's the really cool part for us. We have a genius algorithm already that exists, and it's in the back of our brain. The non-conscious brain stores everything you've read, everything you've heard, everything you've learned. It sits there waiting to be tapped, literally a computer waiting for a search query to be made. Now we want to make that query in writing the essay. We want to say, what would the law have to be to support the argument I just wrote? At that point, you're sending a search query from the front of your head to the back of your head, to the non-conscious brain. You're saying, what do I know that would be the law, or what would the law have to say to support this particular argument? Now, sometimes people will say, well, I just don't know if that's right. I mean, the law that I just came up with, I might have made up entirely. That's okay. You can't make up entire law for every subject on every essay question on the exam and pass. But that doesn't happen. You've been studying, you've been working. You probably know a majority of the law, but there might be some instances where you really are literally making it up. It's okay in limited instances. The point I want to make is you don't have to give up and say, well, I don't know the law exactly, so I don't write about it at all. And I see far too many essays that come to me from students coming from big box bar reviews where they got into just that position. They didn't know the rule exactly, so they didn't write about it at all. Now, here's another interesting thing. You can hedge your results when you're doing this recall of the law. Remember, I said there's two sides to the dispute, a part A and a part B. Well, party A makes their argument, and you say to yourself, what would the law have to be to support that argument? Put that rule of law into your answer. Then go to the other party, party B, and ask the same question. What would the law have to be to support their argument or their conclusion or their result? And then write that rule of law in. Now what you've done essentially is to create a parameter from party A to party B. Somewhere in between those two, or maybe right on the edge, is probably the real law. And that's the great part of this search engine in our brain. It brings us that information. Now, when I challenge my students to do that technique, to try it, and then to check the results after they're done with their essay, most of the time what I hear is, oh my God, I can't believe it. I was almost word for word on what the law was. Now, a lot of those students in our course use photo reading and some other techniques that we teach. But even if you're not a photo reader or you're not using all of the techniques that we would have in our course, you can get very close to the actual rules simply by asking the right questions. You see, I think what happens to most bar takers is that they stop asking the right questions. They are so lobotomized by the process of IRAC writing that they stop thinking entirely, and that's a prescription for a failing result. When you get your sort results in a query in Google or an Amazon search for a product, you sort them, don't you? You go through and you say, well, I like that one, I don't like that one. Oh, I like that style shirt or that manufacturer, but I don't like that one. You sort through it. You use your common sense. You ask more questions. Hey, I thought I wanted a polo shirt, but I really don't want it. I want something different. And as you make those requests on the computer, the internet, the algorithm gives you back more results. The same thing is true when you're writing. You ask your non-conscious brain, I need more information about this argument or this position, and it will produce that for you. I think if you could learn to use your non-conscious brain, what I would think of as the amazing search engine that's in your brain, you'd be very pleasantly surprised at the results. In fact, the way that we teach our students to write is to rely more on their non-conscious brain and less on their conscious brain. The result of that is that scores go up dramatically, and people who fail the exam many times, maybe more than 20 times, as we've had some of our past students express in interviews, suddenly pass, and their scores go way up. Why did that happen? Did they get smarter? Well, not really. They were always smart. They just weren't asking the right questions. You know, if I ask the wrong question on Google, I won't get the right answer. If I search for the wrong product on Amazon, I won't find the right product. It just doesn't work that way. You have to ask questions that will get you to the result that you need. The same thing is true here, and the key question is always, what would the law have to be? Now, if you'd like to know more about how all of this comes together, how to write essays, how to do this technique, and how to employ it time after time in any jurisdiction, I invite you to contact me. There's a link in the notes here, and I'd love to talk with you more about the process and explain how we show our students at Celebration Bar Review how to use this particular technique. But I really encourage you to do just those 3 simple steps. Define the conflicts, articulate the arguments, and then ask the critical question. If you do that, you're going to get results that you can use on the bar exam every single time. Well, I hope you enjoyed that and found it valuable. As I said, if you want to know more about this, there's a link here in the show notes to set up a conference with me. I'd be glad to talk with you about what we do and how we put that together, giving you the outline today, but showing you the process of what you have to do and the way you implement it is really part of what the Bar Review does. And so I'm excited to share that with you. So I hope you'll check that out. Now, I want to just remind you before we sign off today that we've got our special free live training coming up on Thursday, January 10th, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 o'clock Pacific time. Do something different. Make the next bar exam your last bar exam. We really want to focus on helping you pass the bar exam, whether it's your first time or your repeat bar taker. And we're going to show you step by step exactly what you need to do. We'll supplement that with case studies. We've got polls, questions, and then I'll do a live Q&A at the end to answer any questions that you might have. You can register by going to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. Love to see you. Hope you'll join us. We've already got a big crowd already registered for that upcoming session on the 10th. Well, again, thanks everybody for being here. Hope that your January is off to a good start. Look forward to seeing you again next week along the Extra Mile.